Okay, welcome everybody to the June 2023 SJAA imaging meeting. And tonight we have Brian Valente and Greg Stein. They're going to tell us about their trip to Atacama and their telescope there and some other big telescopes they saw there. So please take it away.
Great. Hi, thank you. My name is Brian Valente, and I'm here with Greg, my imaging partner. Greg, is your microphone unmuted as well?
Sure is.
Great.
Hello, everybody.
So briefly, our presentation, we returned from a trip that was kind of as a culmination, about 4 years worth of work, but we went down to the Atacama Desert and had some really fortunate opportunities to not only work with some of our own equipment, but many others, and also to visit a professional observatory at Las Campanas, which we'll talk through. I wanted to just introduce myself quickly, and then Greg will as well. He and I have been imaging together for, gosh, probably, I'm not even sure how many years, but maybe 5, 6, 7 years, Greg?
5, I think, 6.
Yeah, and separately, even longer. You might recognize my voice, for better or worse. I work for both Losmandy and for Astrophysics. I do a number of tutorial videos for these folks. I do a lot of support in those two groups, as well as I volunteer my time with the Open PhD community with Bruce and Andy, helping folks to get the most out of guiding. So if we go through this presentation and you're completely bored but still here at the end and we have time, you can ask me questions about any of those 3 topics as well. I'm happy to do that. Otherwise, I want to just turn it over to Greg for a moment so he can introduce himself, and then we'll get rolling on this presentation.
Yes, hi, everybody. I got involved in astronomy. My daughter went to college, felt that we were losing each other a bit, suggested that we join the Orange County group and buy a telescope, start messing around with it. Yeah, and then from there, started to buy more equipment, and at the same time got lost. And then the people at Losmandy introduced me to Brian, and then Brian started to help me out, and from there have done okay, and have had a great time with it. At a certain point, Brian and I decided to take a stab at the Atacama and send a telescope down there, and of course that was quite adventurous, and that's part of what we're talking about today.
Okay, great. So as Greg had mentioned, like a lot of folks, we started out like everybody pretty much in our backyard, kind of going through a variety of smaller telescopes. On the left, this was I think it was actually a loaner from Explorer Scientific that I had. And then on the right, here's Greg. Although this was the only picture I had of you, Greg, and we were setting up this AP 1600, but the real thing I was trying to show back there was the telescopes that you had in back. I think it was a 90 and a 130, and we're just like everybody else, just trying to make the most of our backyards and our dark skies when we had them. So most of our experience historically has been working on these smaller telescopes. And then in 2019, I believe, Greg came to me and said, "Hey, listen, I really want to up my game in terms of what we're doing here." And I said, "Well, great." And I was thinking maybe we'll get an Edge 9.25, maybe we'll get a Rasa, I don't know, he's thinking. And then he presented this notion of, let's get something up and running in the Atacama Desert. So first I tried to talk him out of it, and that didn't work. So we decided we were going to go ahead and do this. We found OBSTech, which is also, so this is the picture of OBSTech here on the left. They also, if you notice, there's a little fenced in area with some domes in the lower left. I don't know if my mouse is actually coming across, but if it is, I'm circling it here.
It is.
That is actually Telescope Live. It's not quite well understood, but they share, this is the LSOS observatory, this mountaintop, and it is shared by both Telescope Live and OBSTech. If it's not inside the fence, everything else is OBSTech. So these are the professional hosting folks. I think they just announced their 100th telescope that was installed there. The result of our visit, we took a picture of our setup, which is on the right there. It's a PlaneWave CDK20. It's on an Astrophysics 1600 encoder mount. And one of the more prescient choices that we made, and I really credit Greg for this, was to piggyback a wide field, a little Stellar View 80 on it with a ASI 6200 one-shot color camera. And that's been a delight to shoot in the skies down there while we're not shooting deep space objects. And by the way, I'm just going to kind of roll along. Hi, if there's questions or things, I'm not monitoring the chat, but if people have questions, please just stop me and I'll do my best.
Yeah, I'm monitoring it. Okay,
so just by way of example, these are some things we've done. I'm not going to go through them in any great detail, but we have learned a lot and we've experienced a lot, and we image as much as we possibly can every day and every night. OBSTEC and Atacama advertised 320 days of imaging nights, which I think that's pretty accurate. The thing that they don't really say, though, is that the remaining 40 some odd days seem to all happen in a row and in winter. And in fact, it's happening right now. So I don't think the roof has been open for a week and a half, which is fine. Sometimes you got to shoot darks and calibration frames and other things, but it is a great way to get a lot of data, a lot of good quality data. This is some of the wide field stuff that we've done fairly recently, Sharpless 1, and also, of course, the Wedgehead Nebula. We're experiencing a lot of issues related to reflections, and one of the challenges that we have in kind of diagnosing scopes and in dealing with issues is that if there is a kind of a fundamental issue such as sensor tilt or reflections or things like that, they're extremely difficult to resolve, partly because they're hard to find without being at the scope yourself and taking it apart and looking, and partly because when you have 100 or 99 other telescopes these guys are servicing, we just don't get a lot of time to have them actually look at this kind of stuff. So you'll notice there's some reflections or some other issues, but we've kind of made peace with that and are enjoying shooting both wide field and deep space objects. So our original plan, we went to the AIC and did our due diligence. And at the time we felt that the PlaneWave telescope, the ProLine, the FLI ProLine 16803 camera and the astrophysics mounts were probably the best that we could do at the time. This is kind of right at the cusp of when CMOS was kind of coming in, but there were no good medium format CMOS cameras at the time. Now I do want to mention just this week, and Greg, and this might even be news for you, but we purchased and are installing a Moravian G5 camera, CMOS. It ended up being about the same price as the ProLine, but instead of 16 megapixels, I think it's something like 100 megapixels. So I expect that we're going to see a pretty significant jump in our imaging resolution and, of course, file sizes. But we were prepared to go down there and commission the telescope and install it. And at the time, of course, COVID hit and everything got shut down. And I called Greg and I said, this is not that big of a deal. People commission telescopes remotely all the time. And, Greg said something I always remember. He said, yes, but it's part of the adventure. And it made me realize that this really is, part of the adventure is not just getting a working telescope, but actually going and experiencing these things firsthand. So in this last couple months ago, COVID seemed to have subsided enough that we decided to reconvene the trip and headed on down. And we kind of had some informal objectives, but I would put these here. The first thing is we wanted to experience all this hullabaloo we heard about the Atacama skies and, the Milky Way casting your shadow at night and, all kinds of things. We wanted to see this for ourselves. And in fact, as part of that trip, we purchased a harmonic drive that Greg referenced and a set of bino viewers. And Greg, who are the bino viewers from?
Gosh, I'm forgetting his name.
Okay, well, we'll come up with, but we do have a picture of it. But we lugged this thing all over the world. It was incredibly heavy and big, but nonetheless, we brought it down with us. The other thing that we really wanted to do was to look at all of these other telescopes. I think when we installed, we were maybe telescope 13 or 14, somewhere in there. And now with, at the time we were there, I think it was about 80 some odd telescopes. We really wanted to see what people were doing. You know, we felt like this was, you know, probably the best in class kind of installation. And so if we really wanted to see what people were doing and how they were using their systems, this would be a great opportunity to look at this firsthand.
Yeah, what we chose was a bino by Oberwerk.
Oberwerk. And these things were monstrous. They were, I think they were 120s or something.
127, yeah.
127 millimeters. So basically almost two 130 millimeter telescopes stuck together. I mean, they were bino viewers, so they weren't actually telescopes, but you know, it's just this giant thing that we had. We also, just by kind of, I don't want to say coincidence, but Astrophysics, the company, had a installation. We call it the Las Campanas Remote Observatory, or LCRO. For those folks who are involved in astrophysics, you know, you've seen Roland talk about it, and they visited Las Campanas recently. But through that connection, we were actually able to visit Las Campanas and had a lot of very, very fortunate interactions that resulted in us getting a very, very close look, not only at the Magellan, the twin Magellan telescopes and the DuPont, which we won't talk specifically about, but we sat with them for about 3 or 4 hours going through an imaging session and talking about how things work. And that's some of what we're going to talk about this evening.
Yeah, one of the nice things, Brian, is that our connection got us to one of the board of directors of the Carnegie Science Institute. And somehow or other, by the time we arrived, we were like treated like dignitaries. It was quite nice and really taken care of nicely.
Indeed. Just by way of example, I was just looking at this globe and put this in because I think we ended up being about 24 to 30 hours of total travel time, and that included delays and, you know, travel to the airport and things. But it is an extremely long ways away, and of course it's in the southern hemisphere. So many of the targets that are available down there aren't available up here, and vice versa, of course, too. So, you know, while I'd love to be able to shoot, you know, M81 or M82, the Cigar Galaxy, it's just simply not available down in Chile. So it was quite a long trip. The roads there are surprisingly well maintained. This is a very typical example of us driving. We drove a lot, both on paved roads and unpaved roads. But we just remarked constantly how good the infrastructure is for a relatively poor country. And I don't mean that kind of subjectively. We went through a lot of places, just clearly they didn't have a lot of money, but the infrastructure there, the roads and the bridges and the overpasses, well, I should say there aren't actually any overpasses. They do kind of a U-turn in the middle of the highways, but very, very nice to drive on, very nice people. A lot of driving on dirt.
Did you have any picture of how the police pulled us over?
I did not.
Yeah, we got caught speeding, and you know, I started talking English, and the guy is just freaking out, and then he looks at his boss, and they just said, "Hey, go on, get out of here." And we drove off, and we continued to speed at a high rate.
Indeed, I had forgotten that story. I just want to, by the way, point out that only one of us is driving. It wasn't me. So Greg was the speeder, and he enjoys that. But yes, we got away from the police because they were tired of hearing our English, I think. This is very, very typical roads that once we get off the paved roads, an obstec on the left here, it was about I want to say about 1.5 or 2 hours into the Atacama Desert, and it's pretty much an 1.5, 2 hours of exactly what you see here on the left. I don't know if you can see, but up here, that actually you can see the 4 domes of Telescope Live, and that's actually where the observatory is. Over here, a much nicer road that goes up to Las Campanas, which is about I want to say about 4 hours north of El Sauce. Is that about right, Greg?
Yeah.
Yeah, so about 4 hours. But a lot of that kind of driving, and the Las Campanas was very well funded through a relationship with Carnegie, but you see it everywhere in the roads and the kind of the infrastructure and so forth. Just a couple things that really helped us to survive, essentially. One was getting a local SIM chip from a company called Movie Star, which is the kind of the mobile carrier of choice. It ended up being, I think, about $7, and it lasted us the entire week, and we had plenty of data and minutes left. But when it came to using the GPS for directions, it was indispensable. Oddly, you cannot buy these at the airport, and nor can you buy them anywhere near the airport. We had to find a small, kind of like a 7-Eleven equivalent in a town about 2 hours away. We were able to purchase them. And part of the way that we were able to purchase them is by using this Translate application. It's called Translate on the iPhone, which turned out to be incredibly helpful because we don't speak Spanish terribly well, and they don't speak English at all once you get out of Santiago. So having something like this was really, really helpful. And we were able to either type in or speak into the telephone, and it was able to give us back that we could show it to the people. And they were generally very, very gracious and very kind, and appreciated that we took the effort to try to communicate with them and not just yell English at them. So our first stop was OBSTEC. As I mentioned, it is actually technically the El Sauce Observatory, of which OBSTEC and Telescope Live share the space. This is a really premium area of not only seeing, but of telescope installations. So I would say the average telescope, we're pretty typical for a CDK-20. They're kind of headed more into the 24-inch. You see a lot of 24s. You see a lot of plane wave gear, both mounts and telescopes. As you can see, this is actually, I think, this might be roof 6 that is right next door to our roof. But just tons and tons and tons of amazing equipment. And they all pretty much operate continuously. And of course, you would expect them to. The other type of equipment we saw a lot of was a lot of RASAs or hyperstars, and oftentimes collections of them that were doing a lot of satellite tracking. So I am told that if you want to make money as an astronomer, you have to get into satellite tracking and Defense Department type stuff. And there was definitely a collection of those down there in different, I think they had a roof actually dedicated just to that type of installation.
Yeah, and there's a couple of places that are just owned by the Russians, and they're tracking all kinds of things. And it had a little bit of a sense of being ominous.
Yes, like we asked long questions and got short answers, and we stopped asking. I wanted to show just some examples of what I call rig innovations, because I think our expectation was to see a lot of really astonishing equipment, and certainly we did. But oftentimes when we looked very, very close, we found that there was a lot of MacGyvering of things to make things work. So we had an issue. This is actually our telescope, the CDK-20, and we had an issue where it seemed like things weren't balancing well. We were getting some issues with sky modeling. And when we got down there, we realized that they had taken this counterweight. I don't even know what this counterweight is from, but essentially zip tied it to one side of the telescope. which was surprising because it did work and we were totally unaware of the solution. And to come down and kind of see this approach, it was a bit surprising, and I appreciated it. And I noticed that it did kind of flop around a little bit. So along those lines, we zip tied it down a little bit more to try to fasten it down. But we saw a lot of this kind of thing, which was very counterintuitive for the caliber of equipment that we saw down there. Another example on the left, you'll see this was someone else's equipment. You see a lot of very similar types of setups, a lot of astrophysics mounts, a lot of plane wave gear. This was a tandem setup with an astrophysics 130. I think it's a 130 GTX. And this is actually our roof mate who asked me to go over and take a look at his telescope and check a few things. And to my surprise, on the top, his top plate consisted of essentially a plywood board. And I was kind of surprised at that again. And it was sort of funny. And I took a picture just to kind of remind myself of that. But this is, again, a very typical kind of MacGyver-ish type of solution where, I mean, certainly you could have purchased a plate and kind of figured out a way to get everything mounted to that. But oftentimes just getting something that's going to work and work well enough was often the solution at hand. So, here we've got, I don't know how many, tens of thousands of dollars of work and or equipment rather. And here we have this, rather nicely milled, but nonetheless a wooden board in which things were installed there. Another interesting example, this is a fellow, I think this is John Hayes, who had a system down there. And next to his flat panel, he had them erect essentially a dark panel. So rather than shooting sky flats, he opted to just move his telescope, slew it over to this panel, and have an additional source of dark or kind of non-reflective type of stuff that he could then shoot his dark frames into. There is a lot of small lit objects, power supplies, networking gear, all kinds of things. They're just little tiny lights, but when you see the roof observatory camera, a lot of these things kind of light up pretty badly. And so I can appreciate and see why he would want to do something like that, which I thought that was kind of clever. One other thing I want to point out is that maintenance, particularly of the optics, is very important. So the friend of mine who asked me to take a look at his Starfire, the 130 Astrophysics, I took a picture, and this is his front element here. It was completely unknown to him that it was that dirty. I mean, it was, I don't know how you feel about your optics, but this was a bit much for me. And that can be pretty typical when you get into environments like this. So I did, of course, clean it up as best I could. But one thing that we had pointed out to them, and they're starting to do, and you'll see here on the left, is they now use, basically it's an industrial version of canned air. And they will blow off on a regular basis the mirrors and the optics to try to keep them clean. But it is definitely a chore, and that is not something that we expected to see, both on terms of the calibers of these telescopes, as well as just the amount of dirt on these as well. So remote observing isn't always all that it's cracked up to be in terms of the maintenance, but it's something that we certainly came away with an appreciation for. There were, I think, at least two, possibly more, 1 meter installations. One is owned by Mike Selby, who owns, I think, and operates, I want to say maybe a half a dozen telescopes down there. He's got a 1 meter, he's got several 24s, he's got some 17s. I mean, just the amount of light gathering capabilities he has is pretty astonishing. And he and Mark Hansen have made a pretty good dent in the number, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity of images that are just absolutely spectacular using their instruments. However, this particular instrument was not owned by them. This is the 1 meter. And that's Greg there sort of looking at it and just showing by comparison how big this thing is. Apparently the owner had called up and said, what's the best telescope that I could get? And after some back and forth, and he's saying, no, better. They said, well, there's the 1 meter. And he said, yes, I will take that one. And they said, well, we don't have any room for that. And he said, okay, well, I'll pay for a new observatory roof. And they agreed and installed it. What's interesting about the 1 meters is they have a mechanism by which you can install instruments on both sides of the Altaz. So here in the middle, you can see that there is some sort of probably a full frame ZWO camera, filter wheel, some other things. And then on the opposite side, which you don't see, is a camera selector wheel. I think it's from Optech, where there's a series of devices that are available. There's one for planetary. I think there's one for spectroscopy, a few other things. But I mean, just the sheer volume of information and data gathering capabilities is completely overwhelming. And it's all the best stuff that you would expect. And they told me that this telescope has not yet been used for any type of light gathering or data collection types of things. So it's interesting to me to see that it may not always be all about the equipment. And certainly the folks who are doing the MacGyverish types of things it's kind of necessity is the mother of invention, because they just want to get out there and they want the quickest path to getting light. Whereas here we have this absolutely astonishing instrument with a bunch of cameras on there, and you couldn't ask for anything more. And it's kind of just sitting there waiting to be used. Another thing we had was observing in the Atacama, both visual, and I brought down a little camera, I think a Canon RA. I'm normally a Nikon user, but figured I wanted something that was able to capture additional information in the hydrogen alpha. So I kind of hooked on my 14mm lens to see what would happen. These are just some examples of that. I think it was 16 or maybe 18-inch Daub that they got up and running for us so that we could observe visually at night. And then, as Greg mentioned, the Oberwerk Bino viewers here, we had it set up on a Ioptron harmonic drive. And Greg, I don't know if you happen to know the model number of that, but it was a relatively new one. It worked great until it just stopped. It just quit, I think, at the end of our first night. And one of the things that I was really impressed by, these are the guys over here who were the workers kind of there on a regular basis at the observatory. They said, hey, let us take it apart. We'll take a look. And we thought that's just going to be a disaster. But sure enough, they pulled it apart and found a wire that had not been soldered correctly, put it back together, and we were back in business. So that's very impressive. These guys, again, are very resourceful. They're very fearless to get things working. And, we see a lot of that in the services that they provide. One thing I wanted to mention, which was kind of surprising to me, and Greg, if you have any additional thoughts about this, but when we were observing, I thought what we were going to experience was just more better versions of the same things we could see here. And the one thing that really struck me about looking anywhere in the night sky under these seeing conditions, which were absolutely stellar while we were there, is that there was a tremendous amount of this cosmic web background that we could see between the stars. It was so, I just picked this picture of the cosmic web, which is more of the formation of the universe type of stuff, the cosmic background radiation, but it looked very much like that to me. And I was really surprised at how much of that kind of stuff we saw while doing the visual observing with both the Daub and the Bino viewers. Greg, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add in terms of just the visual observations?
Well, at one point I gathered some of the staff, and actually a few of them, one guy he knew every constellation. He knew where everything was. He was he had a lot of stuff in his head as a young kid. But the other staff, they actually ended up telling me that hardly anybody really took the time to look at the sky that often. But
Well,
I
yeah,
was
the
out there.
visitors. Yeah.
Yeah, I was out there for hours, and we bought some really great reclining chairs and just observing and looking and watching. And then at one point I gathered everybody together and did a little meditation with them. Oh, and got everybody to be really quiet and just take it all in, no talking or anything. And you know, it was an amazing time, actually.
So in addition to a few nights of visual observing, we also, of course, took some pictures. So here, this is I would describe this as a recreation of Greg looking through our bino viewers. This is when it stopped working, so we kind of were stuck. But I said, well, while we're doing this, at least let me grab a photo of you looking into those while we can sort of show this night sky. This is only a 30-second exposure. It's nothing particularly remarkable. The large and small Magellanic clouds, which you can see here to the right of the Milky Way as it's rising, are they stick out like a sore thumb. I mean, for myself and maybe for Greg coming from the Northern Hemisphere, we just, we thought, what was that? I mean, how could you not possibly see this incredibly large thing? But of course, that's not available to us in the Northern Hemisphere. So we were really struck by that. The right side is it's a series of 30-second exposures. I think maybe a total of about 5 minutes where the Milky Way is coming up and over the hills. But just really, really astonishingly clear skies. There is a bit, there was a surprising to me amount of sky glow, which you can see down here in the lower right of this picture, the greenish stuff. And also a surprising amount of light pollution coming at the horizon. I mean, I was expecting this to be pitch black all the way around, and we could at both sites see both, I think, La Serena and another town whose name escapes me, but I mean, they were noticeably bright. And I think due to the lack of pollution, the lack of other kind of sky elements, it didn't affect much above, say, 15 degrees, but they had expressed some concern about, as we all, I think, have, about the encroachment of urban living on these dark places. So after a few nights, we made our way to Las Campanas, where we arranged to visit. This is a shot on the left of Las Campanas that has the twin large Magellan telescopes, and there's sort of a various smattering of different structures down here, ending right here with the DuPont telescope.
The original one that they installed.
Yes, and still is active, and we actually visited with the team that was working there, which was I think a set of grad students continuing to do their sky survey work. As I mentioned, Astrophysics has a installation there that's about, hopefully you guys can see this mouse, but it's right in this area here, and they call it the LCRO. It's a 12-inch f8 Mac cast design on an Astrophysics 1600 mount, and it is one of the things that we stopped by and help set up and maintain. It's now has a second life. It kind of went down during COVID, and it's back up now with a new camera and some other improvements. But we're imaging on that. Just right before this call, I got an emergency that the roof wasn't opening, so I had to go and kind of remotely open the roof as well. So we wanted to see the giant Magellan telescope. We had seen all these pictures, and we're very, very impressed by the possibility of seeing this thing. It's truly a spectacular vision. And instead, we were met with something less than stellar. Marge Christian went with Roland, I think, a couple weeks after we did, and she was able to actually get into this site. And this is kind of the current state of it. You can see there's a big round hole here, which I have a slightly different shot. But they are actively working on it, but it is not very far along at all. And so the reports I've seen recently about a 2024 first light, I think, are probably greatly exaggerated. This is another good example of where you can see this is kind of the main portion of where the telescope is going to sit. And then the hole that comes around it is where the platform is going to rotate. And then even further out is the edges of the building. So if I just kind of back up here for a second, hopefully you can see that this is what I'm talking about here, right in this portion of the telescope. But it is definitely not far along. It is a very impressive and large hole, but nonetheless a hole at this point. In the meantime, we made our way to the Baade Magellan telescope. This is one of the two twin telescopes that is currently operational. They both, they actually don't work in tandem. They work separately, but they're obviously similarly constructed and do different types of work at the same time. So we had sort of a notion that there would be lasers shooting out and they would be somehow synced and be some sort of binocular type of setup. And that's, nothing could be further from the truth. They're just two installations of very, very large 6-meter telescopes doing work whenever weather permits. When we visited the Baade telescope, we didn't have any invitation. We didn't have a formal thought that we would go in. We just kind of pulled up and we looked around, and it was a night where the clouds were still present, so none of the observatories were open. And I'm not even sure what we were doing. We were standing around in the parking lot and we were by ourselves. And I think one of the doors opened on the side of the telescope, and this person popped out, and we didn't know what to do, so we wanted to wave. You know, we're not here to steal anything. We're not going to steal your cars or anything. And they said, "Hey, you want to come up?" And we said, "Sure." So we marched up the stairs and came in and met these two fellows. This is the control room. And we sat for about, I want to say probably about 2 hours waiting to see if the conditions would improve. These are the two operators. And by the way, this is it, right? This is the staff running this one telescope, which surprised us. I mean, I don't know what we expected, but you know, something that's probably out of Austin Powers, you know, 15 guys in lab coats, twiddling knobs and investigating things. And nope, it was just these two guys. And there's a gentleman right here. This is a little sort of a Zoom meeting. But on this side, it was I think it was a postdoc looking to do some remote observing on the telescope. And he was actually in Pasadena waiting, and we're all just waiting to see if the skies would clear up. So they gave us a bit of a tour and talked about it. We went and saw the telescope, which I'll show you some pictures of here in a moment, while we waited for the skies to clear. And in fact, actually, it did end up clearing up, which was really quite nice. One thing that's surprising to me, if you'll notice down here in the lower right, they use all Macs, these little Mac minis. And I'm pretty sure that they have installed Linux or maybe rooted them or something, but I'll show you some of the software. It looks like it's all custom software, but they are a Mac house through and through, and they don't really have a lot of other machines. So that was a little bit unexpected, but they're very proud of all that, and it seemed to work really well. This is, so let me back up here. This screen over here, this gentleman had two of these big giant monitors, and he had a series of screens happening. This particular one, you can see the series of software systems they have running. Some of this is the active optics that I have a different and better screenshot of. I'll show you here in a moment, but just the amount of data that's coming through that tells them about the status of the telescope, the various instruments they have, are all showed here. And one of the things that I personally walked away with, and I thought, wow, you know, these guys have these giant Dell monitors. I want to say they're probably maybe 40-inch monitors. And I thought it was a really brilliant idea to get a big monitor and kind of use it for remote desktop type of things, and use them for different types of connections. So one of the things that I came away with, and this is a monitor that I purchased and did the same thing. It turns out if you take a 4K monitor and you cut it up into fourths using something like Microsoft Remote Desktop, they end up being 4 1080p monitors. So I have here, this is probably the OBSTech telescope that we have. This here on the right is my all-sky camera that was local. Down in the lower left was my backyard observatory that I run remotely. And then in the lower right was the LCRO telescope. And I did a little bit of research on this. I'm really happy with this approach. I ended up purchasing actually a TV called Hisense, which I am always loath to do when people buy TVs and they talk about them as monitors. But I did look at the best possible gaming monitor, which was a Gigabyte 55-inch gaming monitor. And there is a review done, and it was a very reasonable review. But essentially, they said this is nothing but a Hisense monitor with a couple extra, better stand and a few other things. And sure enough, I looked up the Hisense monitor here and ended up getting a 65-inch one. So this is just kind of one of the takeaways that I had of a really nice way to operate kind of multiple remote systems. Sometimes if Greg's imaging in Malibu, which I'm not local to, I'll be able to pull up his telescope and actually run it at the same time and have all these going. So back to his monitors, I wanted to show that he has a lot of information at his fingertips. This piece to the left here is the active optics. So every 30 seconds, there is a basically kind of an OAG, right? An off-axis camera that takes a picture, and based upon the measurements of the stars, their shapes and things will actually deform the primary mirror. And you can see some of this deformation here. And that is essentially what is their active optics for this 6-meter telescope. They were grousing a little bit because this is a bit of older technology. And I guess in some newer installations using active optics, it's all in real time now. So there is no delay or anything like that they're waiting for. As I mentioned, one of the things we were waiting for was for the skies to clear enough. And he kept disappearing and reappearing, and we weren't sure. We thought maybe he was taking a cigarette break or something. But we can see that he's got all kinds of weather information and all kinds of forecasting stuff, all kinds of monitors and things. And we asked him, well, how do you know when the right time is to open this telescope, open up the observatory? And he marched us outside. This is the door that they come in and out of. And we walked along this little platform here. And he put his hand right here and he said, if this part is wet, we don't open it. And if it's dry, we open it. And that was it. That was his, of course, he's got a tremendous amount of experience, but it's, again, just sort of, it's interesting to see that understanding and knowledge kind of trumps all this, fantastic detailed equipment, even on an installation of something as impressive as the Magellan telescope. So we were just, we thought that was pretty funny. And we, of course, told him so and thought it was really great that he knew how to do this. And sure enough, he went out there later that night and he put his hand on it. He said, it's time. And although we looked up and felt like probably we wouldn't have done that, he did open the observatory up. And sure enough, it ended up being a very clear night and some successful data acquisition for this PhD. This is a little bit more close up of the active optics. So they have a series. This is the kind of the pattern of the primary, which of course is much larger. It's a 6-meter telescope. And then this would be the deformations that the little tiny motors or actuators worked on. So when they take a picture and they do this, it will actually move these motors in tiny ways to ensure that the stars are in fact round. Up above, I was again kind of thinking this is very typical of what we do, but he's got himself a guide star. They acquire a guide star, they start guiding on it. Of course, the actual camera being used is quite different. But again, all of the instruments they have are along the edges, the outside edges of the primary mirror and the secondary, and that's how they gather a lot of this secondary type of data. We were very curious. So this is the telescope instrument itself. Very similar to the 1 meter we saw. There's a series of instruments, cameras. There's one here. There's another one here. There's, I think, at least one more, if not two more, on the opposite side. And they all, of course, are designed to do different things. And then there is a rotating mirror at the bottom that switches these around to point at whichever camera or instrument they happen to be using. Some of these are about the size of a small minivan, by the way. I mean, they're absolutely monstrous machines. This is Greg down here at the bottom, so you get a sense of how big this is. And I asked them, I thought, well, boy, you know, something that's this big, they're not gonna have a flat panel probably. So I asked them about sky flats, and it turns out that they don't do sky flats at all. In fact, a lot of what they do in terms of spectroscopy is they have to take flats at certain wavelengths. So they have kind of a flat panel, but they put different tubes in depending on the type of gas or element that they are expecting to do some spectra on. And over here, so I'm kind of zoomed into this secondary here, you can see that there is a little flat panel that's on the side, but it pops down or pops up. I'm not sure. I think it pops down and illuminates. And this is how they take their flats, which I thought was kind of an ingenious notion of just kind of intercepting it right where it needs to be. The spectroscopy was quite interesting. So they do quite a bit of that on this telescope. I believe that the imaging scale they told us about was only on the order of 1 or 2 arc seconds per pixel, which was very different than my expectation of what we would see. But they have software that reads in segments of the camera at a time, and this is he's pointing to one segment that's being loaded here, so you can see of the entire full frame. Small segments are very small pieces of this, and it takes quite a while to load the full thing. But they do multi-slot spectroscopy, and this is an example on the right of the spectral line that they get. And this is, it's so long that they have to sort of show it in a series of arcs. So they've got software that ends up taking this and essentially linearizes it, and then they're able to analyze it. But compared with a number of amateur types of spectral lines that I've seen, this is a pretty astonishing thing for me to see. And again, I'm no spectroscopy expert here, but he managed to explain enough of it to me to be quite impressive. And I'm sure there are other folks on this call that could probably speak more eloquently to this.
This is an HL spectrograph, which has the benefit of giving both high resolution, but also a very broad spectral coverage. So this is actually pretty common in professional observatories, and some amateur spectroscopists also use HL spectrographs.
Great. I was hoping you would speak up. So that was it. That's what we kind of wanted to cover, and we wanted to keep it short, primarily to see if there was other topics or things that you wanted us to talk about. But we just sort of walked away with this feeling that there was a lot of similarities to the kinds of things we do as amateurs with the kinds of things that sort of the advanced or serious amateurs do, those folks who have the big, large telescopes, and that equipment really isn't just the kind of the main takeaway, that it's really just getting out there and trying to make it happen and being adaptable that makes a big difference in terms of the kinds of things that people are able to achieve. So with that, I wanted to stop and just see if there were any other questions or other topics maybe that we didn't cover that you guys might be interested in chatting about.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian and Greg. And please open it. Yeah, who's got some questions for them? You know,
I do have a question. This is sorry, this is Julian. I'm curious, how did you ship the equipment to the observatory?
How did we ship our own equipment?
Yeah.
Boy, that is there is an art to that. So aside from the physical packaging and everything, which of course, you know, plane wave and other things come in sufficiently capable boxes and crates and things like that. It turns out shipping is really tricky for a couple reasons. First of all, there is a significant import duty for equipment. I think on the order, Greg, I want to say it was something like 30%.
Yeah, 30%.
So, you know, we coordinated with OBSTech to talk about the best ways in which we could deliver things. They have a box in Miami that for small things like filters, you know, maybe a camera, they have a regular kind of monthly drop that they come and they deliver, but it's very, very limited. You can't ship large amounts of equipment. So we shipped it down, I want to say maybe via DHL.
Yeah, DHL.
And
we what we also did is all the equipment, of course, that we were shipping down was used. I mean, new. But what I did was then sell it to one of my nonprofit entities, and therefore it became used. And then I gave it used values at you know, roughly 40% of what the purchase price was, and thus we saved some customs duty to the tune of a 60-70% discount.
And we did have to use it. I mean, we actually broke it out of the boxes and set everything up. Which reminds me, I think maybe for the description high, I did end up producing kind of a write-up on some best practices around working with a remote observatory, including issues like import and so forth. One surprise that we did experience had to do with the original CDK that we bought was the CDK 17. And we had some issues with it. There were some optical issues, and I think we spent must have been a year, maybe a year and a half on this. And ultimately we decided that there was a problem with the primary, and that we wanted to not only take the opportunity, but to swap it out, but also to possibly upgrade it to the CDK 20, which we ended up doing. But when you export the equipment, there is an export fee as well. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I think it may be equivalent to the import fee. And it was a surprise to us. And it's not like, well, you guys imported it in and therefore you're just taking it out again. And we could discuss the reasons why they have this, but it was a sizable export fee as well.
Wow.
Does that answer your question? Is that Julian?
Yeah, that was Julian. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, one small point, if you're ever shipping it, maybe you know how to do this, but you get those little things that you paste on the boxes that show the G-forces that they've suffered from. And the guys that are picking these things up, you put enough of them on the boxes and they know what those things are, and therefore they're going to be handling them a little bit better, and they're not going to be throwing them around as much. So those little G-force buttons, if you're shipping anything, they're worth a few bucks each that you put on them.
So you tested all this stuff locally, obviously, before you shipped it down there, and then they put it all together again.
Yeah.
Yes, and I had so yes, but I wish that we had, on retrospect, done a much more thorough job in a couple ways. And again, I have as a result of my experiences and my experiences with Greg, I did a write-up on talking about exactly this, but it really needs to be extremely well tested. So when we had this issue that turned out to be a kind of a turned edge on the mirror, it's really, really difficult to get their attention, to troubleshoot this. And then as we found out when we needed to replace it, oh my God, it just took months and months and months and tons of money for the import and again, the re-import fees of the new telescope. So I wish that we would have had a longer time to actually test everything and make sure at a kind of a ongoing deep space imaging caliber, we would have done all that. And then the second thing, we should have labeled every part with labels and kind of, slot A goes into tab B kind of things, because we just sort of assume that they would know what they were doing, and they do, but they don't necessarily know exactly how everything works. So for example, we had some issue for a couple weeks to resolve where we couldn't quite get into focus and we thought something was happening. Well, it turns out they had left out one of the adapters, the spacing adapters for the back focus. Had we actually gone through and labeled everything and just color coded them and sort of showed exactly where things go, I think we would have avoided a lot of the issues that we ran into as kind of first time remote observers.
Yeah, John Hayes talks a lot about he's another one who's written up a best practices for putting a telescope remotely.
Yeah, so the black, the dark frame thing that I showed earlier is John Hayes, and he and I don't know if we're roof mates, but he and I chat a bit, and I was helping him with his installation. He also just recently went down to OBSTech and installed all those things and was doing some sky modeling that I needed to help him out with. But yeah, a lot of his experiences and our experiences seem to line up pretty well, for sure.
I'd be curious about any extra gear from what maybe we might be used to that you added because it's remote, in terms of power cycling things or remotely controlling things. And then I'm also interested in is there some sort of automation software above and beyond image capture and whatnot that you use so that the whole thing can run unattended and choose targets and all that?
Hey, Brian, I think the first thing you might want to mention, if you want, is just the specialized computer that we bought, because that thing has been a champion.
Right. So in terms of the things that make remote, that we have found to make a big difference in remote imaging, the first one was the reliability of the computer. So when we talked to OBSTech, and I think one of the things that we did do right was we asked them a lot of questions, just asked them for a lot of recommendations. And they said that fans fail all the time there. In fact, without our knowledge, we eventually found out that 2 of the 3 cooling fans on our FLI camera had failed, and we weren't even aware of that. And only when we just, there was a few nights where we couldn't quite get down to our cooling temperature did we realize what was going on. But they did say computer fans fail all the time. So either send a whole bunch of backups, or better yet, buy a fanless computer. And we ended up buying a fanless kind of a industrial PC by a company called OnLogic. It was spec'd out pretty much like you'd expect any powerful mini PC to be. So I think it was a i7, maybe 16 gigs of RAM, a couple terabytes of disk space, of solid state disk for both the C drive and the D drive. We use Dropbox actually to move files back and forth. So if there's an imaging session, I wake up in the morning, all the files are already there on my computer. I can go through them and scrub for bad ones, and then I'm off to PixInsight. They do have a fast internet, which is very good, but we try to be respectful because everyone can't be logged in at the same time and doing remote imaging. So we try to set everything up reasonably automated. I have now, so nowadays I'm using Nina. We started with Sequence Generator Pro, but found, like a lot of folks, that it does a great job, but if we really want to fine tune things, we needed to do that. So another discovery we made about the ProLine camera is that if you just disconnect from it, it doesn't start cooling, it doesn't start warming up as we expected a lot of the Coke can ones like ZWO and so forth to do. It stays cooling. So I think we had about 2 solid weeks of the camera being cooled before they pointed out that it was like burning hot in the middle of the day. So we actually put in some additional commands in Nina to make sure that the camera's warming. And then also we use pushover as an application to let us know kind of the status of things that are going through. So in any given night, you know, my watch or my phone will let me know that the session has started. I drop a few notifications in there, like, you know, autofocus was complete. The target was slewed and centered. We're beginning imaging. Depending on how interested I am, I might, you know, have it tell me every time there's an image, but, you know, that can kind of get a little bit much. Otherwise, you know, we don't do a lot, and I think we're pretty consistent with a lot of folks there. We don't do a lot of completely automated multi-day, multi-month imaging sessions like you see with ACP or something like that. There are a few people who are starting to use Voyager, and Voyager has got some, well, I shouldn't say, there's a lot of people using Voyager. There's some few people who are starting to use it for some of the more advanced capabilities around kind of ACP-like capabilities for multi-day, kind of set up your targets. You have many, many targets, and then it will automate the selection of the targets and filters based upon criteria that you set up and image multiple times. But in a lot of cases, like I've said, there's more interruptions from roof activity, weather activity than I think I would feel comfortable with in just leaving it completely fully automated. And we may get to that point where we're, you know, both in terms of our own comfort and expertise, we might get to that. But right now, every day we start it up ourselves and press the run button. We use, we used to use TeamViewer, and now they have a VNC connection. And what I like about all those options, sometimes I'll be driving along and completely forget that, you know, it's 7 hours ahead. At some points in the season, I'll pull over, I'll bring up my little phone, and I'll just sort of zoom in, be able to press the start button and have it actually be able to go up and running without having to worry about getting back to the PC at home, which might be an hour or 2 hours away. So that's a really nice way to handle some of that remote imaging type of stuff.
Does your system know when the roof is open?
It can. They do have a roof status and a safety monitor, but in my experience so far, it doesn't seem to be terribly reliable. And I don't mean necessarily from a technological perspective, but if there are clouds coming by and somehow it kind of gets a false positive, then everything sort of grinds to a halt and it parks the telescope and, you know, it waits for the safety monitor to say everything's good again. I just haven't had good experiences with that yet, where it has kind of, in my experience, or at least in my opinion, reliably kind of started and stopped. If something happens and the roof has to close, the roof closes, right? I don't have any control over that. So I will get a series in my pushover app saying, you know, these things have failed, the autofocus has failed. I have a general kind of failures go to pushover in the Nina kind of global settings. So if I'm starting to get a series of those, chances are it's going to be because the roof is closed. They also use Telegram. Telegram, that's right. That's the one, right? So they actually have a bot on Telegram. I got to check and make sure it is. That will actually tell us if the roof is closing or if it's open or anything like that. So I can also get additional notifications that things like that are happening.
All right. Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, I guess not. So speak now, or we'll close the meeting. Well, I guess, thank you very much. Brian and Greg, we really appreciate it. We'll see everybody next time. And everybody, please unmute yourself and give them a hand.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your patience. Hope it was useful and meaningful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks,
Hey, bye-bye.